the protests in the streets are, in their current condition, are insufficient to bring down, to not even to bring down the government, but to force the government to change its policies, to promote the democratical changes. And I suppose that the government, and particularly Putin, are still have a relatively strong position, and they're not going anywhere anytime soon.
What do you know about Alexei Navalny and his whereabouts?
So there are reports, as you mentioned, that he has been moved to a higher security penal colony that is still in the same region as he was before. It's in Vladimir region. He basically was moved a couple hundred kilometers. And that is actually a good thing, because he will still have enough contact with his lawyers to keep us informed of his well-being.
And what do you know about that, about his well-being? Because as I was mentioning there, of course, there was this nerve agent attack. We know he's been held in some pretty brutal conditions. I mean, what are the circumstances like for him?
Mm-hmm. So from what I know, he has received necessary medical assistance, and he is now relatively well off. At least there is no imminent danger to his life. It is, from what I see, not in the interest of the current government in Russia to murder him in the penal colony, and at least they do the minimum effort to keep him alive. And they decided not to send him to distant regions such as Magadan, for instance, in the far east of the country, in the western Siberia. Even though they had an opportunity to do so, the Russian legislation allows the penitentiary service to put him in any high security penal colony in Russia if they decide so.
Of course, Navalny's network has effectively been dismantled. Those small demonstrations we saw at the beginning of the invasion of Ukraine resulted in thousands of people being rounded up. Your organization was effectively stopped from operating inside the country. What are you able to establish about the extent of opposition within Russia to what is happening in Ukraine?
Mm-hmm. The opposition has largely been destroyed, and that is pretty much linked to the fact that the organization of Navalny has been labeled as an extremist, and as a consequence, the participation in the protests organized by the foundation of Navalny, the Foundation to Fight Corruption, and other organizations. That means that you will also be potentially involved in a criminal case against you as an extremist. And the discontent with current armed conflict, with the war in Ukraine, is very widespread. However, the initial protests that took place in the beginning, in the early stages of the war, in the first 2 or 3 weeks of the war, they have unfortunately died out. The government has used rather effective methods of suppressing the discontent, the protests. They used a lot of criminal cases against the individuals that were ready to protest. There are currently, we estimate, about 160 criminal cases and more than almost 16,000 administrative cases. That means people get 15 days in detention, fines of up to 500 euros. And what is more important is that they use also the administrative measures to they fire people who work in the government institutions, in the universities, in schools. So basically, any professor or teacher who wants to influence their students to tell them that what is happening is wrong, that you don't have to always agree with the government, especially in such circumstances. Those people at least face expulsion from their work. And at worst, they can also face the criminal prosecution, and on several occasions that I cannot, unfortunately, talk about in detail, they have even been tortured.
So you're saying that people who have expressed their opposition to the war in Ukraine, to what President Putin's doing, people are still being arrested under these rules. You can get up to 15 years for showing disrespect to Russian authorities. You're saying people are still being arrested and being tortured?
That is correct.
What sort of things are happening? Obviously, I know that you can't name people, but can you give us some more sort of examples of what is happening?
Mm-hmm. So in case you are, for instance, a blogger or an influencer of any kind, and you have a significant number of followers online, and you decide to post something about war, in case you just show general discontent with the war, that would probably lead to a fine. That is like 50,000 rubles in most cases. However, if you talk about the particularities of war, of war crimes, of attacks on Mariupol, on the Kiev region, the bombing of Odessa, in those cases, people are generally prosecuted under the Article 207.3. That is a new article that is named the it's basically spreading fake news about Russia, about Russian army, and that is the article, as you mentioned, that under which you can be sentenced up to 15 years of jail time.
Can I just ask you then, do you think that given the brutal suppression that is going on, does that mean that President Putin is safe in his job? Is there any way in which any of this dissent could lead to some sort of move against him?
It's very hard to tell. Unfortunately, I'm not that deep involved in the intricacies of the criminal policies. Now, however, from what this year and the last year have indicated, the protests in the streets are, in their current condition, are insufficient to bring down, to not even to bring down the government, but to force the government to change its policies, to promote the democratical changes. And I suppose that the government, and particularly Putin, are still have a relatively strong position, and they're not going anywhere anytime soon.